everybody. I am going to talk about Conservation International. One of the things that I'm really tired of seeing is stressful climate news. I feel like there's a wildfire that's burned here, water's contaminated there, deforestation is happening here. It can make us feel like there really is no hope for the climate, but there are hopeful headlines out there, and Conservation International is just one of the places who are creating those hopeful headlines. As someone who really prides herself on the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle, I'm a big fan of companies who really strive to better our environment. And like I said, Conservation International is just one of those companies who's really taking charge of making happy headlines in environmental news. One of the ways that Conservation International has impacted biodiversity in the world is by saving wildlife across the globe. One of the ways they do this is through a really cool AI program that they pioneered called Wildlife Insights. Wildlife Insights is one of the largest camera trap databases in the world. It gives the world insight into the movements of animals that are largely unseen by the human population. And these cameras have a really big impact in conservation and making sure that we're doing things the right way. For example, South America is a country that is a continent that's really rich in biodiversity. One team, it's actually called the Team Network, partnered with Wildlife Insights, and they were able to determine that 17% of animal populations in South American rainforests increased, as well as 22% stayed constant. Constants and increased biodiversity is just one of the ways that we're able to confirm that our climate is healthy. Another really important aspect of these wildlife cameras is that they're helping enact policies that are actually tackling climate change issues. Not only does it help scientists do research on various species, but policies to protect wildlife will not pass if people are unaware that the wildlife is there. For example, if your neighbor said he has an endangered toad in his neighborhood and all he has is word of mouth, policy makers aren't really going to take that, where if you have the irrefutable proof that an endangered toad is living in the neighborhood, policies are more likely to happen. One study completed in July of this year concluded that extinction risk of over half of threatened species would not be reduced sufficiently without a target promoting recovery actions. These targeted recovery actions are impossible without protective policies in place. Wildlife Insights by Conservation International is making the evidence easy to attain so that policies can improve for all animals. Supporting the ecosystem and the wildlife that calls it home will in turn support humans. Conservation International's initiatives have impacted groups who rely on the environment in their day-to-day life. One of the biggest examples of this is their conservation efforts at the mangrove forests in the Gulf of Nicoya in Costa Rica. These specific mangrove forests are so important to the environment and the people who interact with it. The forests are home to many fish species, help to provide income for nearly 6,000 fishers every year, and have provided food for the community for over 100 years. If this ecosystem is destroyed, the lives of the people who live there would be impacted negatively. Conservation International also seeks out partnerships with indigenous communities to improve livelihoods and ecosystems at the same time. This is something that's been important to their company since 1987 when it was started. One of the initiatives implemented by Conservation International is Wash and Watersheds. This is a watershed management program that focuses on hygiene and sanitization in indigenous communities. Conservation International connects human health to environmental health. Wash and Watersheds was implemented in communities in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. When members of the 5 communities it was implemented were interviewed, they noted that there were improvements in different areas that really affected them. Access to water, water sanitation, livestock health, hygiene and sanitation practices, decreased violence and crime, and sustained environmental stewardship. All of these have amazing impacts on the people who take care of our environment. All of this goes to show that Conservation International's overarching goal is to combat climate change across the globe. Bringing it back to those mangroves we were talking about, one of the climate change goals of Conservation International is to ensure that all mangroves are protected species and in turn increase mangrove forests by 20% by 2030. One of the reasons that mangrove forests are so important is because they store a good portion of the world's irrecoverable carbon. And this is carbon that we just can't risk losing. If this carbon is touched, we will not be able to access it again until 2050. It is also stored in peatlands, marshes, and old growth forests. Conservation International is striving to have over 300 million acres of these ecosystems protected from deforestation and climate change. 300 million acres of protected irrecoverable carbon sounds pretty awesome to me. Although areas can be protected, they can still be vulnerable to climate change. Think of how many protected areas were scorched during the California wildfires. Another thing that Conservation International keeps in mind with its efforts is the vulnerability of these areas. They've implemented a new framework for vulnerability of these areas and for assessing vulnerability that has been studied over 19 national parks in South Africa. This tool is fundamental to effective adaptation planning. Our protected area assessment tool is the only tool that quantifies protected area vulnerability to climate change in a comparative index. If resources are pushed to highly vulnerable areas, the impact may quickly be overshadowed by climate change. In conclusion, Conservation International is just one of the companies pushing for a better tomorrow and making tangible impacts daily. Conservation International has made it a priority to promote wildlife, biodiversity, partner with communities most affected by the environment, and tackling climate change head-on with science-backed initiatives. Their initiatives and programs are continually shaping our environment, and I cannot wait to see the amazing work that they do in the next few years. I know that it can be easy to think that there is nothing you can do to help out the environment, but I promise there is. Conservation International proves that we can save the world if we all do so together. This is truly a company that is doing important work.